Hey everybody, we're here to go ahead and talk about the installation of this EK block on a R9 290X. You can see that this is the copper version. We got our little parts kit here with our thermal paste, a couple of water caps, and some screws. We also have some thermal tape here as well that we use to kind of cover up some more chips on the video card. This is a pretty nice card. The one thing that one thing I like about it is it covers the entire length of the card. I think that's a kind of a neat feature of it. I want it to look really nice in my case. I like to have it all covered up so it matches the theme of the build here. So we're just going to flip it over and take a look. Really what we need to do is basically take every single screw out of this. We're going to remove a couple screws off of the front, releasing it from the front plate, and then every screw across the back as well. We're just going to use a small Phillips screwdriver. So you can see we have a couple of screws here. We'll go ahead and pop those two out. One thing that I do want to reiterate, before you start this process, test your card, put it in a machine, make sure it works. If you don't have a machine build or you're not using it already, just put it on top of your motherboard box and put some stuff in it. Make sure it's going to work and output video for you. We don't want to have any damaged cards. So now that we have all the screws removed on the input side, we're going to go ahead and remove all the screws across the back here. It's going to take just a few seconds to do so. So bear with me as we remove these. They do have little springs on them which stay attached, so don't stress that. You'll see those come out. Let's work our way around the back side of this. About halfway there, just a few more screws to go. This one right here, it's an odd color. It's a little bit different, so we're going to pop this one off. Don't forget this screw. It's easy to overlook. Three more to go. Alright, now that we have all of our screws out, we can go ahead and flip this card over. Now you can see that it's starting to wiggle off a little bit. Now what we want to do is wiggle it off. You can see that right on the back side, all the chips where I was just kind of putting my finger, those are where the IC chips are at. So we're just going to pull this case up. The fan module portion will come off. It's attached with the wire cable that we need to pull out, which is right here. Just go ahead and wiggle it back and forth to go ahead and release for you. You can see that the thermal paste to the GPU here is still on the back side of that heatsink. Let's go ahead and try to work this free. Now this is the tricky part. Basically what's going on is you have this thermal tape that's still on top of all of the remaining chipset on the board. So you want to wiggle it off. It's pretty stuck on. You don't want to really yank the board. What we're going to do is just kind of try to wiggle it back and forth and get it to free up a little bit. Just keep wiggling it back and forth. You see we're starting to make some progress. Alright, there we go. So here is all of the thermal tape and stuff that goes on to the remaining chips on the board. So really what we need to do is go through and clean this off and then put all of the compound back onto the card. Now to clean this, what I'm going to use is some isopropyl alcohol. The higher the proof, the better. And a cotton ball. And we'll also be using a nylon spudger here. And what I'm going to use this for is just to help scrape some of this paste off. There is a lot gooped on here. I used a lot of paste on this chip. I'm just going to scrape the kind of the top layer off. We're not putting a lot of force on it. We're just kind of trying to clean it up a little bit. We've got some around the edge here. Now the one thing about the cotton ball is it does not clean up around the chip edges very well. It always wants to flake off and leave cotton on there if they have the little resistors and things around it. So now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and clean it up. Not putting any excessive amount on there, just enough to get a little bit wet to remove the paste. Now we're going to clean up the top of these remaining chips here. Now these have a little bit of an oily residue. That thermal compound tape leaves a little weird residue on top of them. So we're just going to go through and clean them up, make sure that there's no weird interactions between our new tape and what was on it beforehand. Now there's kind of a set of chips in a T section up at the upper left-hand corner, and then a whole line of them behind the resistors in the back. I'm just going to use a microfiber cloth here to wipe some stuff off of them. Make sure there's no additional dust or residue on them. You can go ahead and clean those up if you want to as well. Just make sure you get all that thermal paste off. I want it to be nice and clean. A little residue on there still. Just going to clean it up a little bit more. The new thermal tape comes in little squares. Just go ahead and peel it off the backing, and let's go ahead and put it on top of each chip here. All of these black chips, we'll need to put that new thermal pad on top of it. Now, it doesn't necessarily matter if they're exactly straight, you just want them to cover the entirety of the chip itself. About halfway done with this portion. We have a few other chips that we're going to go ahead and put this stuff on as well. So here's the back we're just going to peel off. Now make sure you're using the one that was cut into squares. They're specifically made for this if you have the EK block. Four more to go. We're almost there. All right. You can see right here this silver line and these three up here. We're going to put our thermal tape on top of that, the thermal padding. And to do so, before we do so, we're going to go ahead and clean these up as well. Now, if you have a cotton swab, you can use that. I'm just going to put a little cotton ball on the tip of my nylon spudger here. Let's go across and clean all of these up. Have a little bit of residual compound on them. And these three up here as well. So do the exact same thing. Now we have this additional piece of thermal pad here. You can see that it's not cut into squares like the last one is. What we'll actually have to do is cut this to fit. And to do so, we're just going to use a pair of scissors or a razor blade. Will cut that is perfect. We've measured it, we've cut it to fit. We're just going to go ahead and lay it down on top of here. Now it may be a little bit long, so just go ahead and trim it up if you need to. Just make sure you don't damage any resistors or anything on top of your video card when you're cutting it. We'll need to do the exact same thing for the remaining three that are to the left of the GPU here. It's going to cut a piece to fit on top of it. We'll cut it just like the one that they had. We'll cut it into a T shape. Here we go. Well, now that we have all of our padding on, we need to go ahead and put our thermal paste on top of our chip here. So you can either use what's supplied with the block itself, or you can use some thermal compound of your choice. Now, I'm going to put this as the Waterblock specifications say. It's almost in like an X star shape. So we're going to go ahead and just try to put this on here. Now, you'll see that when you remove the old cooler off of this stuff was just caked on top of this chip. So it doesn't matter if it seems like you put too much on top of it. You don't want to put an extreme amount because that'll actually reduce your cooling. But I'm just going to use what they recommended here, which is this pattern. Make sure that line's nice and thick and try to clean it up just a little bit. I didn't do a great job of applying that paste on there. Now the next step is to go ahead and put our card on top of our water block here. Now the easiest way that I found to do this is actually put the water block on top of the box that it came in. Go ahead and just line the holes up and set it into place. The reason why I'm doing it this way is if you try to put the block on top of the card laying flat, the actual fitting holes, the fitting block itself, will not actually sit down all the way. It'll want to lift off because it protrudes a little bit past the board itself. So you want to put it on this method to get it in place. Now we're going to go ahead and put our screws back in. These are the ones that are supplied by EK that came with the water block. Now we will actually be putting on a back plate, so we'll put the screws in just a little bit funky so we can fit the back plate onto the back of this board. We're going to put in our chip screws first. So I'm going to put them in kind of a star pattern so we get a nice equal force pressing down on it as we put it back together. Get that thermal paste to spread out nice and even. Give them a nice good turn, not extremely tight. We want to snug them up. So here's the back plate we're going to be using. You can see that the screws that we'll need to actually leave out to put this in. This is going to take up a total of 5 screws, which we'll leave off of the board when we're reassembling it. Now again, we're putting these in nice and snug. We're not trying to force them in extremely tight. We just want them to pull the board down to the thermal pads, but not to the point where we're going to cause any fracturing or stressing onto the board itself. A few more screws to go. So we can put our backplate on. Now to do this, we actually need to put some thermal padding onto the backplate itself. Now, there's a defined actual width or thickness that these thermal pads need to be placed on the back of this to make sure it makes contact correctly. Now they will send this thermal padding with you if you buy the backplate. We're going to put our thermal pad on for the backing of the GPU. Just going to try to make sure we line it up nice and straight here. And then for the back of the chipset, we'll actually need to cut it. Make sure you use the one that came with the backplate and not any remaining portions you had left. It needs to make sure it's the right thickness, or else you won't make contact with this backplate. So we have our width cut. Go ahead and just peel the backing off of the thermal pad. And trim it up to fit the right length. Now we can go ahead and take it and put it onto the back of the card itself. And put in the screws that came with it. These are Allen wrench screws on the back. I'm not going to put these down extremely tight to make sure I can line up all the holes correctly. These are beveled screws, but we may have to move it around just a little bit. Make sure it fits properly. There's one more to go. Let's get them nice and snug down. Not extremely tight. I'm just going to peel this foiling off of the logo here. We'll go ahead and do that for the other side as well. And that is the installation of this water block onto this R9 290X. If you have any questions, throw them down in the comments. We might have to answer them. If you found the video helpful, hit the like button. If you want to see the rest of this build, check it out in the description. As always, thanks for watching.